And we're back.
My name is Father Cham Sakluba.
And I'm Spat Maraza.
Spat. This is the second time we did the weird name bit.
Is it really?
And yes,
I
you
don't
don't remember? It was one of our first episodes.
I'm bad at remembering things like that. Well,
I'm bad at remembering things in general.
That's a good point.
So
yeah.
it's all good. Who is our guest today, Father
Hey,
Cham?
our guest today was Jason Trennert. He's the founder of Strategas Securities and really a phenomenally interesting person. He's also the author of My Side of the Street and a couple of other books, it looks like, from...
That's a great name for a Wall Street book.
It is My Side of the Street.
That's a great name for a Wall Street book.
Well,
We didn't tell him that when we should. Jason, if you're listening to this, that is a great name.
It's a
for
great
a Wall
title.
Street book.
Yeah. Well, because it also kind of implies like I've taken over one side of the street, and Wall Street's a big deal. So there's something to that. I really like that.
So what we're saying is he's the man.
Yeah, but we got to talk about lots of things, which was also a lot of fun. This is an interesting episode. I was talking to Jason before we recorded, and kind of how we've interviewed a whole bunch of people, but it's all been in pretty explicitly Catholic fields. People who have written books about different things. They've made a contribution through this, or they've got a particular ministry that they do for the life of the church. And Jason is in a lot of ways, he's breaking the mold for us. This is not a guy who has done the explicitly. This is a Catholic finance thing, but he's bringing in, I think, that real beautiful synthesis of Catholic faith and the integration of Catholicism with professional skill and with the world around us, and he's recognizing that the finances, society, politics, these are all things that go together. I was really interested.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. And we got to talk about other stuff. Like we got to talk about marijuana, and we got to talk about movies, and we got to talk about all kinds of, this was fun. This was really cool.
Heck yeah.
So, if you want to hear us talk about politics, drugs, and other things, this is certainly not what you would expect on The Tangent, but this was a really fun conversation. And educational values, the philosophy underlying it all, this was a great time. Jason Trennert, phenomenal guest, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I don't know how you feel, Matt.
I felt great about it. It was fun. I really enjoyed it. I don't know. You covered it, man. I don't know what to tell you.
All right. Well then, let's let the music play and let him get to Jason. Jason, it's great to meet you this way.
Yes, it's great to meet you, Father.
Really appreciate having you here on The Tangent.
That's my pleasure. And
I guess I should start by letting you know that we've got that mutual friend in common, our friend Jay Coyle. That was the big surprise.
Yep. Yeah. Jay's my best friend from Georgetown, and then I've known Kathy a long time.
So Matt, how unreal is this? My admin Kathy looks at my calendar and she sees that I've got podcast recording on the calendar. She says, "Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "We're going to interview a guy named Jason Trennert." And she goes, "No." I said, "Yeah." She goes, "That's Jay's best friend from college." I said, "Oh, so her husband is Jason's best friend." This is great. It's a small Catholic world, and I love it.
Yeah. It's terrific.
It's perfect.
Well, Jason, let's maybe do a little bit of the bio here first. Tell us how you end up establishing Strategas Securities. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, no, that's great. Great Strategas. It's a long story how we came up with the name, but we can get into that at some other point.
We are called The Tangent. You take the long way.
Should I take the long way here? It's a funny thing in many ways. People talk about, obviously in your line of work, calling, and my people in my line of work, you wouldn't think of it that way, obviously, for a lot of people. But there are, believe it or not, quite a few people that get, kind of catch the bug of Wall Street. My parents were both public school teachers. That neither of them owned a share of stock in their lives. And to make a long story short, after my junior year of college, I worked as a cold caller for a number of stockbrokers. They're called financial advisors now, but in those days they were called stockbrokers. And then I really just caught the bug, and then I knew that's what I wanted to do. And then to make a long story short, I wound up working for a very good outfit that Steve Lee was associated with by the name of International Strategy and Investment. And I worked there for 16 years, and I became the chief investment strategist there over, kind of started out on the bottom and then worked my way up. And then at a certain point, I really just wanted my own ship to steer. And so 16 years ago, I started in 2006, it'll be 17 years this September, I started Strategas Research Partners with 4 other people from ISI. And we're still going strong. So, some said it would never last, but we're still here.
Yeah. So what do research partners do? What's the idea here?
Yes, this is, many, and this may be more information than you need to know, but in the old days, before what they call negotiated commissions on Wall Street, and that was May 1st, 1975, there were negotiated commissions. There were many research firms that were called research boutiques. And what they would do simply was provide research to big institutional investors. And there were many of them, and they were extraordinarily successful. Negotiated commissions came in, and that made that business much more difficult. And that's unfortunately when, frankly, the Wall Street research became more and more aligned with investment banking, which eventually led to some of the questions and moral questions that you see later on in Wall Street's arc of history. But we were very lucky because we started out as a research firm, and we're always a research firm. We have no investment banking. And so what we do, quite simply, is think about the markets, the economy, the political atmosphere. We spend a lot of time looking at charts, and we make determinations and forecasts about the economy and the markets. And we sell that research to institutional investors around the world. And so we have clients in 45 states and 25 countries right now.
Wow. Okay.
I teach gym.
What's kind of remarkable too, and that this is kind of, despite all of the talk about technology, we may be doing it the old-fashioned way. I'm kind of a very old-fashioned person. But we still, someone from our firm will visit every one of those clients each year. And then I traveled 82 days last year. So, I go everywhere from like Omaha to Paris. It's and everything in between. So, super fancy places and places that are not so fancy either. Yeah. So but it's a blessing and a curse in many ways to spend that much time on the road. I mean, the curse is just airline travel and getting through TSA and all the rest of it, right? So no one likes that. But the blessing, and I'm not just saying this, it really is. You meet a lot of different people, especially, and you have a much better understanding of the economy and other people across the country. And so it helps. I find it helps our research a lot because, as you know, New York, it's hard to be well adjusted. And, if you live in Manhattan and have an office in Manhattan, it's hard to understand kind of what regular people go through. Mm-hmm. And I find that these travels are extremely helpful in just understanding economic trends, political trends, social trends. You get to see meet a lot of different kinds of people.
Something that really intrigues me with what you're doing is that you're taking not just the Wall Street, the stock market aspect of all of this, you're also looking at the political situation, the social situation, you're looking at the economy as a whole. And then by this going out and visiting different places, you're actually meeting the people on the ground. I think it's really easy when you're in one particular field to get hyper focused on that. I'm a priest, and so my focus tends to be right in my parish, and that's kind of the full orbit that I've got. I don't really look super far beyond my parish boundaries sometimes, and I need to. And then there's also the things that like I know really well. I'm good with theology. I'm good with philosophy. I don't know anything about the stock market. I don't know anything about it. I see those videos of guys on the floor, the trading floor, and they're holding up pieces of paper and they're yelling, and I have no idea who they're talking to, how they can hear anything, or what's supposed to be happening. And then at the end of the day, you see the stock market floor and it's littered with all these pieces of paper. And like, those are the papers that those guys were holding. Don't they need them for work or something? And so there's a whole aspect of this that's totally foreign. But what I'm hearing you talk about, and I read one of your articles where you kind of make these connections between the financial world, the banking world, the economy, society as a whole. And I think that's a really important thing to be able to do. And it's probably important for us to do it in a variety of settings, not just in the financial sector, but like it'd be a good thing for priests to be able to do. It's a good thing for teachers to be able to expand. It'd be a good thing for politicians to look beyond just their particular office and their particular role and see society as a whole, and maybe travel a little bit more and get back in touch with the reality on the ground.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think, a priest is way ahead of most of us in doing that sort of work. I would argue this is we're going off on a tangent here. The place where we really need it, in my opinion, is in the technology world. And because I feel very strongly, and people have all sorts of ways of doing the job that I do, but I very much view it as a social science. Economics and the financial markets are social sciences. They're not hard sciences. It's not like chemistry or physics or because you can't run controlled experiments. Human beings are very fickle, very capricious, right? So that's why understanding all of these other things, and this is the way I do it. I spend a lot of time reading history, and I was very fortunate to have been educated at the time at Georgetown University, where I think I was very well educated in Western civilization, and that's been enormously helpful. I also went to business school, and I learned all these quantitative methods and all that stuff. But a lot of those things become discredited after like 4 or 5 years, or there are new quantitative methods or what have you. Whereas a lot of the things that you learn from classic literature or theology or philosophy, those are standard. The Bible, they're standard things. That's humanity.
Yeah.
And so
the school that I teach at is a classical education. And so the very fact that these kids, instead of learning, what the latest author of the latest textbook thinks, are actually just reading the primary sources.
Right.
And so instead of reading about, the Revolutionary War, they are reading John Adams' letters.
Right.
And that is irreplaceable to read directly from the author.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little bit of and again, there's a tendency to want to replace everything with technology. I hate to go. I'm going back to it's kind of a bête noire of mine. I really have this love-hate thing with. It's mostly hate with technology, but I think the humanity can be worn away from it, as we know, and it leaves a big hole in terms of what people are exposed to and all the rest of it. And sometimes you wonder whether if you're too focused on just engineering, without some sort of sense of how it actually affects people, whether it's computer software or whatever it is, that you could get yourself. It's not hard to imagine yourself getting yourself into trouble, or it causing trouble, or heartache, or sadness.
Oh, yeah. I again, right. So I come from it from the perspective of teaching, and we are running into students have begun using AI to write their essays for them.
Sure.
This is
even at your school, Matt?
Even at my school.
No.
Yeah. And so it's something that we're running into, and like the primary concern, I mean, there is the secondary concern of, well, how can I give you a good grade here? Right. You didn't do any work. But the primary concern is you don't know how to write an essay now.
Right.
You have asked this computer program to write your essay, and the priest that I co-teach with, Father Joseph Gill, friend of the show, Father Joseph Gill, has another show on Veritas Catholic Network called Restless. We're just waiting for that shout out from Father Joseph Gill.
Yeah, we're still waiting.
No, he has once.
Oh, okay.
But I'm obligated to give him a hard time. But he asked this, I think it's called Chatbot AI. I think that's the name of it.
You're right.
To write his homily, just to see what it would do.
Yeah.
And it was pulling from the church fathers, and defining God as love, and utilizing, I know it's the church fathers, but utilizing specifically, I believe, the Augustine's Confessions, and so it's like there is some real skill that is lost, and technology can be used as this wonderful tool, but it seems to me that in particular with modern technology, the advances we are making now, we are losing so much more than we could gain.
Yeah.
Like the capacity to interact with another person is what's on the line here.
Yeah. Well, there's that. I think also, it gets to certain questions about education too, which is to say, you could look at education as purely utilitarian, which is like, let me get educated so that I can get a good job and make a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Or, I think the idea of a classical education is that it helps you become a better person, maybe more civic-minded, better educated, more understanding of people. So, as an example, the people, one of the great ironies, let's say, of this chatbot
AI,
is that the people that are probably most at risk of losing their jobs as a result of this are software engineers.
Right.
Ultimately.
Right. You ask the AI to go write some code.
Right. So there are others. There's writers and others that can lose their jobs as well. But there is a certain irony in that it seems somewhat cannibalistic, right? So you're creating something that's actually going to put yourself out of a job, and I'm not sure everyone who learned how to code really, went into it with that idea that was.
They learned how to code, but they certainly didn't learn logic.
Right. So.
Well, this is an interesting thing because obviously we're using technology to have this conversation. If it wasn't for these kinds of web software things that allow us to have this kind of conferencing, we couldn't do this. So our whole podcast rests
Riverside,
on the fact
if you are listening, we are not upset with you.
No, we love you very much. Our podcast exists because we're able to have this kind of technology. So at a certain point, we know there's a necessary use of the technology that's available. And I talk to parents about this all the time as they're dealing with how to navigate these waters with their kids and how to give their kids technology while at the same time monitoring and being careful with it and not letting the kids get totally sucked in. And then I talk to teachers about this, and there's the question about how much tech do you use in the classroom versus hard copy books? How much are you asking the kids to read and write, and especially to write by hand? And I've got a whole thing about the fact that they're not teaching cursive in schools anymore, which I think is a huge mistake because we're losing something of art and of value. And there's also just the technical skill, like the tactile skill with your fingers that's lost when you take away cursive. I think it's the most insane thing in the world that you wouldn't teach kids cursive. But you know what I found? This is great. Okay, tangent here, right? We have our middle school youth ministry, and as part of their confirmation requirements, the kids have to come at least once a month for middle school youth ministry. So they come in and they sign in, and I watch the kids sign in, and they'll write sometimes half in print, half in cursive, because they've learned just enough cursive and they want to try it. Like, the kids want cursive. Why are we taking that away from them? Why are we saying this isn't a worthy skill? It's absolutely worth it. But then we get so much into tech and all this other stuff that they can just type everything. They don't need to worry about their penmanship, but penmanship matters. These are things that are important. So there's like striking that balance with the technology and the actual and the human. In your line of work, Jason, as you're doing the market research, as you're examining stocks and all these other things, obviously, technology is hugely helpful in that, but it's also giving you an insight into some of the dangers. So as you look out at the world, you see the necessity and the usefulness of technology. So that we're not talking in an anti-tech fashion.
No,
but
where do you? Not a Luddite Yeah, I mean, we use plenty of tech,
Yeah.
right? But I think there's a risk in using too much of it.
So where do you see the risk? What are the big risks that you would see that we should be cautious of?
Well, I mean, I'll use I'll talk about my line of work first, and then perhaps just maybe more socially, societally, like based on what I see with my own family and myself, candidly. But I think, Father, you and I talked a little bit earlier today, but I found in my life, in my career, 33 years, that some of the people who have made the biggest mistakes, that have come closest to torching the entire financial system every 10 years, are people that are extremely focused on econometric models and quantitative skills, and don't think a lot about the potential outcomes that wouldn't be covered by the model. Because models, economic models or quantitative models, are only as good as the inputs you put in them. And so, as an example, before the financial crisis that was largely caused by housing, the models didn't consider the idea that housing prices could actually go down. And that was because there was no data of aggregate housing prices before 1940 or something. So you built this very, very elegant model, but you didn't consider something that could happen. And it was just because you were limited by the data that you had. But if you had read history and you'd say, well, this is actually the thing that you think is impossible, actually is more likely. It's more likely than you think. It's still very unlikely, but it's not a 0.001% chance. It might be a 1% chance or 2% chance, and that's what happened. And so, to me, that's why it's important to have an override of history and philosophy and all these other things. Understanding human beings, I think, is very, very important. Otherwise, you could think that you have the social science perfectly wired when you don't.
Well, so in that example, we're looking at data, and the data really represents more the numbers and the particular economic trends, but it's failing to take into account a different type of data, which is the sociological, it's the human, it's these other areas, these other types of knowledge, but those don't really get figured into the what was the word used, econometric model?
Especially in economics. I mean, the 20th century, they call it the first measured century. Okay, and it was probably the first in many ways, because it was the first time you actually really started to measure things with any sort of precision or regularity. Or many things before then was very, particularly with economic data, it's hard to get very robust economic data really before. I don't. You can piece things together, but really regularly and professionally done data, it doesn't really exist before like 1930, really. And so, of course, humanity, it encompasses thousands of years of human beings, many times acting precisely the same way. The names may change, but the outcomes a lot of times are often the same. And so now, of course, I'd say I've learned this in some ways the hard way myself. I don't want to make it seem as if I had this all figured out myself, but this is just through 33 years of doing this. You realize that there's got to be a combination, and particularly in my field, my line of work. You have to respect the data and the numbers that you have, but you also have to have a very good sense of history and of human beings, psychology, emotional makeup, mass movements. All these things become very, very important. From a broader perspective, I mean, I think, and you and I maybe chatted about this over email, but I feel, as a father of two children, I wish the smartphone and the iPhone were never invented. I think I really think it's a pox upon the emotional and mental health of adolescents and also adults. I mean, I wouldn't exclude myself from that either.
Agreed.
It's just, I think with kids, it's harder to realize how harmful it is before it's too late. So
Yeah, and it's hard to teach kids how to balance it.
yeah.
So they're just intrinsically more susceptible to it.
So then I would imagine though I mean, have you been teaching long enough so you can see a marked difference in people's attention span, or that
right.
kind of
So I've only been teaching for 2 years.
thing?
I'm 25 years old.
Okay.
So I actually was in high school, and when I got my first iPhone, so I can look at my own education as an adolescent, pre-iPhone and post-iPhone.
Right.
And of course, there are more amusing stories. Like, for example, my junior year of high school, we started studying something that I wasn't necessarily as interested in during U.S. history. So my friend and I watched all 3 Pirates of the Caribbean movies on my iPhone in the back of class. But at the same time, right, that is an indicate, like, distraction was so easy. I had a miniature television sitting directly in front of me on my desk. That said, the school that I work at, we take their phones in the morning.
Good for you.
Yeah, and their cell phones. I mean, listen, we have found kids that you sneak in with a fake phone and whatever. You're not going to have a perfect system, but for the most part, the kids are pretty good at it. At a minimum, even if they sneak their phones in, that means they can maybe glance at it for 2 minutes in the bathroom in between periods.
Yeah.
And okay,
Right.
but you're certainly not using it in class. But the beautiful thing is that during lunch, they get a 40-minute lunch. They can go outside. They talk to each other. It's awesome. They actually communicate.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's an accident that at our school, if you go to when I proctor a school dance, right? The kids dance with one another.
That you call it proctoring a school dance is hilarious.
I have to call
you
it
proctor
because
an
I
exam.
can't.
You chaperone something else. Like,
No. I am not attending the school dance. Let's be very clear. Despite the fact that they asked my wife and I to go to prom. We are not going to prom. We might proctor prom, but we're not going to prom. But it's awesome to see that the kids, like, in an age where so many of their peers are just totally, sucked in, they actually are willing to communicate with one another. It's great.
Yeah,
It's
no,
great.
I'd say amen to that. I mean, I see that with my own kids. It's very hard. Of course, you'd love to. You'd love to say, well, gee, I remember thinking, like, I'll never let my kid have a phone, or but it's virtually impossible in today's world. I mean, very, very, very difficult. I'm sure there are parents that have done it, but I haven't met any, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And but it's finding the balance so that the kids can learn how to communicate with one another. I think it also a lot of times too, the way you're communicating over phone obviously is so. Again, it sucks out the humanity. You're not seeing the facial expressions of the other people. You're not getting a sense of who the other person is. It can obviously lead to behaviors that are so harmful that would never happen in a face-to-face meeting, right? And I think particularly with girls and other things, there's a lot of other self-esteem issues, other things that come up. So
it is interesting. I've talked to there are quite a few kids. So I think the school has a total. It's fairly small. It's also fairly new. They have 110 students, maybe 115, right? And I think there are about 10 or 15 kids in the high school that don't have cell phones. And it is interesting because they simultaneously recognize the freedom that comes with that, and also the fact that they are not necessarily ostracized,
right,
but that there are some real difficulties. So even these kids, they've got enough presence of mind to recognize, well, I'm definitely benefiting from not having a cell phone.
Yeah.
But also there is a true harm that comes with it. So I do think it's a real balance. That said, when I was doing my pre-Cana for getting married. I got married last summer.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. The priest that began our pre-Cana, we actually did our pre-Cana in one place and then in a second place. But he began it, and he had just, is the word accepted my wife into the church, Father? Is that how I would phrase that?
She was received.
She was
into
confirmed.
The church.
She was received into the church.
Yeah.
And that had happened a couple weeks prior. And so, funny enough, he said, and I'm getting my master's in theology, so I'm familiar with the Catholic faith. But he said, most of the times these meetings are me explaining to people who Jesus is. You know, like they want to get married in a church because grandma asked them to. But with you guys, I don't have to do that. So I'm just going to give you a bunch of practical advice that I've heard before. And he said, based off of his time in confession with teenagers, the single worst thing a parent could do would be to give their kid a smartphone. That if you are looking to open a window to mortal sin for your kid, it's giving your kid a smartphone. And at the same time, it's like, well, I hear that, you know, and that, I mean, those are pretty ominous words, you know, like you got to take that seriously. But at the same time, ostracizing your kid's not a good thing, you know? So it really is a balancing act.
It doesn't surprise me in some ways that I mean, listen, for adults too.
Oh,
They've
absolutely.
opened up a whole other world of things.
And
avenues, right? But particularly for kids that don't have the context, and I think it weakens, unfortunately, the power of the parents to influence their kids, or at least it's competing with the
Twitter
influence the parents have over their kids, right?
Yeah.
You know, they're not going to. It was raining all weekend, and this, you know, and my 14-year-old daughter, I don't know how much time she spent on her phone yesterday, but it was a lot. It was, you know, shockingly. I'm afraid, I'm embarrassed to even admit it, frankly. But the concept of her spending that much time with me and my wife would be unthinkable. I mean, just, you know, it would be Guantanamo Bay for her, you know, or something.
I'm saying all of this, and I literally got a new iPhone a couple of days ago.
We're all part of the same hypocrisy, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you know, we understand that, but it doesn't, just because of that doesn't mean that what we're saying isn't valid, right? I mean,
no, not at all.
Just because we can't walk the line perfectly doesn't mean that the line doesn't exist or it doesn't have value.
Considering that, how do you think you strike the balance? Not to put you on the spot, right? But if you had to strike the balance, is it I refuse? I make a setting on my phone that I don't spend over an hour on my phone per day.
Yeah, I mean, my wife and I have, and again, we have two kids, and my son, frankly, he was among the very first to have have a phone. He's 20 years old, and so with him, unfortunately, he got very wrapped around the axle on it, and so we had to very much limit his phone time to certain hours and make sure he did his homework, and then we took it before he went to bed, and you know, all of those things.
I think that's great.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, you have to do something, because otherwise they'll.
That's it.
At least my son would have, never gotten any sleep or anything. My daughter, we take it at night before she goes to bed. But she's kind of left her own auspices, but she's a different child, and you know, kids are all different, and they handle it differently, and all the rest of it. But I think, you know, at a minimum there have to be some limits, and you have to be very. And I'm hardly an expert on this, but as parents, you just have to be very attentive to how much time they're spending on it, and whether it's interfering with the things that are really, really worthwhile.
Given how ubiquitous the technology is, so from the time that a kid is in even middle school now, I mean, I didn't have a cell phone until I was in college because you didn't have cell phones. When I did get a cell phone, it stayed in the car unless I absolutely needed to make a phone call. And like I'm old enough to have had a cell phone that charged for roaming. So I go way back in this. But all of these things have become so common. And in a lot of ways, these have also become tools that are necessary in education, in business, in social life. We
Absolutely.
can't imagine not communicating with people this way. And yet we've still not figured out the way to replace a handshake and that face-to-face communication.
Mm-hmm.
So coming back to your approach and your staff's approach as with Strategas, you're going out and you're pulling in all this information. And so you're using a tremendous amount of technology to bring in all of that stuff, to analyze it, to examine it, and then to compile information for people that can then be sent out. But you're still going and directly meeting with people. Do you see yourself kind of preserving a skill so that it doesn't get lost?
I think, I mean, that isn't the intent per se, but it's also from a very practical point of view. In my opinion, it's the only way we have been able to build the business and maintain the relationships that we have, because we have a lot of competitors. There's a lot of people out there that do great work. And so, but ultimately my old boss told me one thing, is that people pay people. And I've never forgotten that, because there's nothing more true than that. So, there are a lot of people that analyze the stock market or political trends or economic trends, but having the ability to go and meet the person face to face, to explain to them your point of view, why you're thinking the way you're thinking. And then what winds up happening inevitably, some clients I've had for quite literally 30 years, they understand your own weaknesses and your own biases and your own, they understand things that you're good at or not so good at. But those are very valuable relationships, I think, for the clients too, because they'll understand when, gee, this is something I should really, Jason's particularly good at this, or yeah, he's not really good at this aspect of, I'm not going to pay any attention to this. I'll smile, but I'm going to, I'll wait till he gets onto the other stuff. So I think that it is preserving, and I think one of the nice things, because we hire a lot of younger people, and I think they get much better socially by working with us. And of course, everyone's a little shy, and when you start working and all the rest of it, so that would happen naturally. But I think the job forces them to be better.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you about that. As you're hiring people, especially hiring younger people, maybe folks fresh out of college or something like that, one of the things that we read about all the time is that recent college graduates or people just kind of getting into the job market are often uncomfortable in certain in-person situations. And that goes back to before the pandemic, right? This is not a brand new thing that has only just started. It's something that's been there for a while. And I wonder sometimes, is part of that the rise of technology as a substitute. So I look back to like 11 years ago. Before I was a pastor, maybe it's 12 years ago now, man. I was in a parish, and there was a school attached, and I was in the school one day, and the virtue of the month was courage. And the kids had written these little essays about courage and times that they had to exhibit courage. And one of the boys, he was in 6th grade, maybe 5th grade, and he had written this thing about when he and his cousins were on vacation and they wanted to go and go tubing or something. And they had to they actually had to go to the counter and make a reservation. You couldn't do it online. They didn't have, they're at a resort or something. So you had to go and make your appointment. And he said, so I went and I made the appointment with my cousins, but I was the one who had to talk. And then the next thing he put was, and then the other time I had to exhibit courage was when I thought about becoming an altar boy. And so I manned up and asked. And I just thought that was the greatest way to say, I manned up. I did it, you know?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But there's a skill that he was learning that, at that point, he didn't have a phone. He didn't have any of this stuff. And so his parents were doing absolutely the right thing and telling him, well, you go do this, like go ask about it, and kind of coaching him through it. They weren't going to let him just fail and never do anything. They were going to back him up the whole way, but they were coaching him in how to go out and do that. But more and more and more, as technology is replacing that in-person interaction, there are skills that we're not learning, or that our young people aren't necessarily learning, such that they might be coming out of school with the same degree that everybody who you would want for your firm has. And they might be coming out with the academic resume that looks exactly the way that you'd want it. But are you finding that there's a bigger learning curve on the interpersonal side of things and the social intelligence?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think, I've had some experience in doing 16 years of doing this now. So and when we first started, we had a very traditional, let's say, Wall Street way of hiring people, which would be, you might bring somebody in 4 or 5, maybe even half a dozen times. They would meet with a bunch of people, and then you get together and you'd say, well, do we like this person? Do we think they can do the job? And so on. And frankly, I came to the conclusion at a certain point that our results were kind of random. That we could have picked anybody. Our success was, so we changed the nature of the way we hire people. And so it wasn't so much about personality. You start first with interviewing the person to see if they kind of have the hunger and the interest in the job. And you're trying to figure that out just by talking to them. Have they read books? Have they read articles? Have they talked to other people? Do they have some understanding of what they're going to be doing? So, and if those things check out, then we have them do a practical exercise. So we give them essentially a homework assignment. And so if they're in research, they have to do a research report, or they have to do a spreadsheet or some skills. Or if they're in sales, they have to read the research for a week and then call one of the partners and try to talk to them about what's in the research. And then if they pass that part, then we have them come in and talk to people in kind of what, for lack of a better term, the support staff. The administrative people, the people in the back office. And that's largely to just make sure they're good people, that they're not, so it's hunger, it's skill, and it's good person. And we could care less, to say in our shop, we could care less where someone went to college, which is kind of ironic. I mean, given where some of us went to school, but I would say increasingly, I think it makes no difference whatsoever. I'm not sure if it ever made that much of a difference, but I think increasingly, I don't care. We're just trying to run a successful company. This isn't the faculty lounge at Yale or something. We're just trying to get highly motivated people to do a good job.
So we've got a lot of kids then in high school who are, they're looking at their college options, and they're looking at big name schools. They're taking out enormous loans and things like that. What advice do you give to them about finding a job in the market in their desired field, even if they don't get to go to one of those schools?
Yeah, I have a somewhat countercultural view of this in a way, in that I really don't think it matters. I think there are so many great colleges out there, so many great, I'm not even sure, I mean, in my job, to be honest with you, we don't have anyone in my, that in the professional ranks of my company that didn't go to college. But I wouldn't dismiss somebody who didn't go to college out of hand either, to be honest with you. It's never happened, but I wouldn't dismiss them out of hand if they didn't have a college degree. I would say if you're going in a traditional path on Wall Street, the better school you go to, the better chance you might have of getting a job at a name brand school. If you go to a name brand school, you get a job at a name brand company, right, like Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley or what have you. But Wall Street is so large, and there's so many great companies. And there's so many great companies that would offer you better opportunities for advancement as a young person than Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley. So I very much would focus on actually trying to learn something. Go someplace where you feel comfortable, where you like the people, that offers things that you're interested in, and you'll come out a better, you'll have more fun. You'll be a better person. You'll be better adjusted. And Wall Street is big, even though it's a small industry. It's big enough so that it can accommodate plenty of people. I mean, and what you find, and because I'm very obviously biased because I run a small company, but there's so many great companies that your grandma would never heard of on Thanksgiving Day. And I think the same is true of colleges too. I mean, it's just there's so many places that you can go to and be happy and learn something. People I think lose the point again. They're looking at that as a very utilitarian approach, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you have to go out and you have to make money and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But if you go to a good school and you get well educated and you learn something, you're going to be highly marketable. I really believe that.
Yeah. That is something I try and stress with the kids in the high school, where I say, you're not here just to get an A.
Right.
There are so many kids who would I know that they would give up learning something if it guaranteed them the grade.
Right.
And I try and say you're missing the entire point.
Right.
You're just missing the whole thing. If you're going just for the letter,
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'm curious, right? Since the only real exposure to Wall Street that I ever had was movies, and now and for those of you who can't see, which is everybody listening, Jason was shaking his head there. How does one balance Catholicism and Wall Street?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say, and
do you get this question all the time?
Well, it's I do.
Yeah.
Where I've gotten it, and actually I wrote a book called My Side of the Street. Okay, and I have about 1,000 copies in my basement. If anyone wants one, but there's a couple of things that are in there. One is I have a list of movies that are actually good representations or decent representations of what Wall Street is.
Okay.
And then I also have a story in there where I was on the sidelines of a lacrosse field with my son, and I got to know one of the fathers pretty well. And at a certain point, he said to me, I watched this movie, Wolf of Wall Street. And, is it like that? Is it with the drugs and the women and the partying? And I said, no, it's nothing like that at all.
Right.
And then he paused and he said, that's too bad. So, but, there are, I mean, like in any job or any career, there are bad actors and people that behave poorly. By the same token, the people, that do what I do and are serious about it and want to be successful and last for 30 years.
Right.
This is like, it is a calling. It's a, it is a almost all-encompassing job where you have to work extraordinarily hard and be very much on top of your game. So Wolf of Wall Street would be the worst movie to me, that is like, it has about as much to do with Wall Street as like some guy knocking over a liquor store, or something. I mean, it's disgusting. It's, there's a movie called Margin Call, which I think actually is pretty good, which shows, I would argue, shows some of the tensions, real tensions of people who are professionals face. And one of the real tensions, particularly at a big investment bank, is, especially when things aren't going so well, is, who do you care about first, your firm or your client? And a lot of times you don't necessarily have to make those. It's not a zero-sum game. A lot of times you don't have to make those decisions. That both sides can win. But that movie is particularly good at showing when things are very tense, very tough, or like during the financial crisis,
and realistic.
Realistic. People really had to make those choices. And you have on one side you have people that are signing your paycheck. On the other side, you have people that you care about that are part of the reason why you're getting a paycheck is you have good relationships with them. And so to me, if you're going to show some of the moral tensions. To me, that's one of the better movies that's realistic and not,
Right.
um,
Right.
disgusting, for lack of a better term.
No, I think
Um,
that's the accurate one.
yeah, right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So,
How do we find that space in between the sort of stereotypes? So on the one hand, you've got the movies, the Hollywood image of a very cutthroat, immoral, or at best amoral Wall Street, where it's not so much the work that's actually being done; it's the extracurriculars that are just kind of the
right,
highlight, and the work on Wall Street just becomes the vehicle so that you can participate in all these other crazy activities. And
right,
then
right,
Utilitarian. Yeah.
the other sort of stereotype is kind of the Occupy Wall Street movement of Wall Street represents everything that's wrong with corporate greed and corruption in government and finance and everything like that. I look around I'm in a parish where we have a lot of guys who are financial advisors, financial
right.
analysts. We have guys who are working on Wall Street. We have people who are involved in this industry, and I can say very honestly that these are some of the most honest people I've ever known, some of the most generous people, some of the kindest people. These are not wild and crazy human beings, but those stereotypes persist. And
Yeah. Mm.
I mean, obviously, they're going to persist for a reason because there are some people, like you said, who are the bad actors. But in a much different way, it seems like, especially with your work, that you approach this in a much different sense. This is not so much just for the sake of gain by itself, pure profit or anything, but actually that economics, finances, these things, they actually have a role to play in the health and the wellness of all of society. So how do you look at it?
Well, I very much, and I very much believe that I've studied it, I've looked at it. I feel very strongly that and I'll be, maybe this is countercultural too. I think America is the greatest show on earth. I think it's the greatest, I think it's the greatest country in the history of history. I think a good part of that is because of the depth of its banking system and its capital markets, and which in many ways, and I'm kind of quoting from the book here, but it breathes life into dreams of people, of
Mm.
entrepreneurs, and I also think capitalism in its purest form, and I say this as having a service-oriented company. If it's to be successful, it has to serve the needs or wants of other human beings.
Mm.
Like otherwise, it doesn't. If you're just doing your own thing, or you're not going to be a successful business. So you have to focus on what people want and give it to them in a good way, and so that they want to continue to do business with you. Okay, so again, all of this is largely about time frames. I think good business people, good businessmen and good businesswomen that are in it for the long term, I think they understand that implicitly, that you can't burn other people or and wish to stay employed
Mm.
for a long period of time. Now, Wall Street, I will say, is not without its flaws. I think that some of the things that have happened in the history of Wall Street have changed it. Until really the 70s, most Wall Street firms were partnerships. They weren't public companies. And so in many ways, they were like law firms or, medical practice or something. And our real partnership, which is what I have, where the partners have money at risk, it's the best risk management tool you can have because it's your own money, right? And so you're going to treat that a bit differently than a public company where you're using other people's money.
Mm.
And that, unfortunately, that really started to pick up speed in the 70s. Goldman was one of the last companies to go public in the late 90s. And frankly, that's where a lot of the troubles began, because then you wind up having, and this is where also the size of the government gets very large, but you wind up having a situation where in some of the large companies, you can socialize the losses. So you take all the gains when things are going great, people make a fortune, and then let's say in the global financial crisis in 2008, things fall apart, and then all of a sudden it's the American taxpayer's problem.
Mm.
And that's what drives people insane, and you can't blame them. I mean, and that's why I feel, sometimes you love something so much you want it to be protected almost from itself, and that's why frankly, um, I believe very strongly in having a robust regulatory environment over Wall Street. I don't, and I can tell you, we are a highly regulated firm, Strategas. For being such a little firm, we have plenty. It's a pain in the neck, and it costs a lot of money. But of course, the irony is about regulation is that it generally tends to focus on the bombs that already went off, and the entrepreneurs and capitalists will always be ahead of the regulators, and that's
Right.
why, unfortunately, this will continue to be an issue because the people will figure out a way to get around the regulations and find other ways to take
Yeah.
risks that are too big, or so.
Unfortunately, that exists outside of the financial realm too, right? That there's ways that we put in safeguards and processes and policies after there's been some kind of crisis or misbehavior or scandal or
Of
something
course.
like that. So we put in these policies so that in the future it won't happen, which is good, but also so that we can be seen to be doing something about it. But the bad actors are going to find other ways, and then they'll figure out a way that, well, this wasn't in the policy, so
Of course.
it must be okay for me to do it, and that, of course, yeah, that's seriously a problem.
Yeah.
But uh, in terms of not just the regulatory stuff, but you talk about a public company that has a major problem that then socializes its problem.
Right.
And that's a really interesting phrase to me. It socializes the
Yeah.
problem. So on the one hand, passed on to the American taxpayer.
Right.
Our company goes under, so the problem, the debt, all that money that has been lost, it's really the taxpayer who's lost the money. We got our money already. We made the money, and we're all set to go. Something that popped up in one of the articles that you sent me earlier was I'm going to get the phrase wrong, I think, but the idea of publicly funding private vice.
Right.
I don't know if I'm getting the phrase exactly
Yeah. No,
the way that you said it, but that sounds to me like socializing the problem, but just in a different way. So instead of passing on our failure as a company to the American taxpayer, there's a way in which money is being used to do that. Does that
well,
sound right? Like,
this is
am I on the right track with what you're saying?
I think you're on the right track. It's just I would say that the bad actor in this case happens to be government. I feel very strongly that there's a relationship between public finance and private virtue, and that if you have a period of time, as we've had over the past 12 or 13 years, where we've had very easy money and mass affluence, virtue tends to get lost.
Mm.
And sadly, and I'm going to sound like I'm right out of like 1951 here, but we are, I think, let's say in New York State, I live in Manhattan, we're New York State is not too far away from selling indulgences, right? So if you take, let's say, the marijuana, I hate to even use the term industry, uh, it's nothing more than selling indulgences. You're selling the state has decided that whether it hurts people or not, they're losing out on tax revenue. That they don't have, in my opinion, enough guts to cut spending in places where it needs to be cut. So it's going to find new ways of raising tax revenues, regardless of the impact that it might have on its citizens. And that could be true with gambling too. It could be true with, in some places, prostitution. And so people are people. People are human beings. None of us are perfect. I understand that, but I also think that first do no harm. I don't think the government should be in the business of encouraging bad behavior. We all have temptations of bad behavior enough on our own.
Right. Yeah.
You know, we don't need the government helping us.
Yeah.
So, but I think that's an example of right now, candidly, where our government, federal and state, are failing us.
Well, so in this case, we're talking about legalization of marijuana and basically the government creating an industry. Before this was something that was completely illegal, so it wasn't an industry; it was a black market, or it was at least an illegal
Right.
activity. And then creating it to be something now that can be regulated. So they've could we say they've invented an industry?
I think they're trying. I mean, frankly, I think they're trying to create something that just creates tax revenues for them.
So this
They're
is
trying
how
to,
they're basically starting their own business.
yeah. I mean, I
This is
think
their
they're saying,
entrepreneurship.
we want a piece of the action.
Right.
So
And I guess the hope is that it's better regulated or something. But frankly, in places like California and New York, the black market in at least in marijuana is thriving because the taxes that the state is imposing on these products is so high that people who are regular consumers still buy their
Right.
products illegally.
Right.
So it's, and I don't want to go too far down the road on this because I feel very strongly that substance abuse is one of the great scourges in the United States right now, and marijuana probably seems tame compared to fentanyl or all these
Sure.
other things. But I also think that it sets a tone. And when if you've been to Manhattan lately, you'll smell marijuana everywhere.
Yeah.
It is ubiquitous.
I keep hearing that from
aren't
people.
even hiding it anymore. And
Yeah.
I think that's a shame. I really do. I think as someone who lives here, I think it's just a bad example for business formation or family formation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we know people are going to sin. We understand that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree with you that the substance abuse issues is one of the great scourges that we face as a society. On this one, I have the question, which is how do we recognize the serious problem that is substance abuse without going the route of like the Prohibition era laws against alcohol?
yeah, no,
Because Prohibition was ultimately a really bad idea that didn't really work, created a criminal class and a whole market for all this stuff, and it ended up being an incredibly ineffective way to do
agreed.
things, and it was a poor way to try to enforce morality, and then I might have my history wrong here, so correct me, but it seems like post Prohibition, then there's actually more government regulation over the industry, for the alcohol industry, so more taxes coming in and things like that. But it kind of seemed like, at least I don't know,
Yeah.
the whole thing
Well,
didn't work.
Catholics, of course, were the biggest opposition to prohibition
Right.
For a variety of reasons. And so Al Smith, who ran for president in 1928, was very much they called them wets. He was very much on the wet side.
Yeah, the dries, the wets.
And so listen, I'm just a humble Wall Street guy. I don't know how to solve these issues, and an outright prohibition, complete prohibition, is, I'm sure, not practical or even wise. But I also feel pretty strongly that the state, quote unquote, the state, really should not be in the business of promoting
Right.
these things that are so clearly harmful to people, and particularly kids. So, and that's there's got to be a way to do this so that it's not as harmful as it is right now. And again, I think for a lot of people, they might, this. I'm sure I'm sounding like the ultimate square here. So I get that, but I do think it becomes a slippery slope too, where now they're talking about putting a casino in Times Square, and now they're because
Really, I didn't know that.
oh well, it's largely because the tax base is eroding, because of other reasons. And so
Right.
the quote unquote solution is to essentially create, tax other vices or do other things. So it's just doesn't seem to be a particularly effective
It is
approach.
interesting. I've had this conversation. It's been a different conversation. Again, it always comes back to the things that I talk about with my students. And one of those conversations has been, how do you know what a good society is? And the answer that I have admittedly stolen from Peter Kreeft, who stole it from a different philosopher, was that a good society is one where it is easy to be good.
Yeah. I like that.
And based off of, what we're talking about here, the idea of taxing something and therefore encouraging vice seems to just immediately disqualify our society from being a good society. And I am not saying that with any form of hatred toward my country.
Can I add something to that, Matt? Because I think I think you're onto something there. So the idea that a good society is one where it's easy to be good, and then if we're creating the marijuana industry as an example, right, where we're going to, by taxing this, we're going to generate revenue for the government. What that also means then is that we have to create a way in which this behavior feels like it's okay. And so we actually have to start to convince ourselves that certain things are okay.
Right.
And in the end, we're convincing ourselves that certain things are okay and starting to more broadly accept a skewed vision of humanity and of morality. And all along, there are follow the money, because there are people who are profiting from all of that. And so, that becomes kind of a question. All right, so Jason, what do you think? Do you see that happening? Do you see profit margins increasing for a certain class of people or a certain category, while others are being kind of led down a path that only leads to destruction and to harm? And that's a social question at the same time that it's deeply related to a financial question. Does that make any sense at all?
It's a great question. And of course you can, I won't go too far down this road because again, I'm just a humble father and businessman. So, I don't have all the answers, but
you do. You have all of the answers.
But listen, I just I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with profit. I don't think there's anything. Not at all. I believe free enterprise is completely consistent with Catholic teaching. I think it gives, largely because it provides the most freedom. People are free to choose what they do, right? By the same token, unfortunately, and Father, we talked about this. I think in many ways, traditional arbiters or traditional influences on society, like family, like faith, were far greater than the influence of the state. Again, the state writ large. And I think right now a lot of families and people of faith are finding as if they have to compete with the state in terms of the education of their own children, in terms of the wish to worship the way they want, to have certain ideas that may be countercultural for whatever reason. And that, in my opinion, that's the opposite of what America was formed to do, right? America was largely formed as a way to escape religious persecution, was formed as a way to live your life as you saw fit, right? And so, I have no problem. I'm a big capitalist, but I think there are limits, and I don't think, again, as I said before, I don't think the government really should be in the realm of encouraging antisocial or harmful behaviors at a minimum.
Is the key to healthy capitalism generosity?
That's I don't want to go nuts here, because if I say this, I don't know how many people listen to your show.
We don't either. Don't worry about it. It's fine.
I don't want to get a lot of hate mail.
Tens and tens of people. Listen to
But
every
listen,
episode.
I do think, I'll say that, I don't know if it's generosity. I do think, again, if you build companies that last, I do think a lot of a lot of very good values, I would say, what you would consider Judeo-Christian values at the
Yeah.
heart of some of the greatest companies, some of the greatest entrepreneurs in our history were very religious people. I mean,
Right.
and also simultaneously hated, I would say, Rockefeller or Carnegie or other people by it's a different time, but they also did a lot to help humanity,
Right.
which, if you were going to look at the totality of what they did a lot of good.
Right.
Being able to stay warm, it's big. It's kind of a big thing. Being able to get from one place to the next is a pretty positive,
Yeah.
pretty positive development. So, but
Being able to stay warm while getting from one place to the other.
yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
With the radio on.
Let's face it.
Yeah. So I think that's the one thing I can say. That saddens me a little bit about people's discussion in today's world about capitalism and about America, and it's just that people are. Let's take fossil fuels as an example, because I think climate change has become a secular religion, personally, for many people. Where sometimes you wonder, like these people seem to love the planet more than they like other human beings, and I love the planet too. But there's still 1 billion people on the planet that have never been able to ever use fossil fuels to improve their lives. So it seems rather presumptuous to me. It would seem rather presumptuous to me living in a suburb and in a wealthy area of the country to start protesting the use of fossil fuels when your entire life has benefited so greatly from them. And there are so many other people that have not been able to use them. And so the economics generally is looking at trade-offs, right? It's looking at it because nothing is perfect, right? Nothing is, very few things are perfect. There are a few things that are perfect, but when it comes to these decisions and these businesses, there's always what we call negative externalities. There's always things that, but there's a balance. And that's presumably that's what the state is there to do, is to strike the proper balance between freedom of the individual or the company and the welfare of the people. That so anyway, I got off. That's a tangent that I just went
That's
on.
all right. You fit right in
there. But I think again, I wish there were more adult conversations, for lack of a better term, about some of these issues, as opposed to people really just clutching their pearls and freaking out and saying like, all right, let's just calm down. Let's think about why is this good? Why is it bad? What can we do practically to get better? And
I love that way of describing it. Adult conversations.
Yeah, and I think that too many people want to yell and scream now. I'm not quite sure what that's all about.
There's just so much bickering.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of virtue signaling without virtue.
Yeah,
I find that the virtue signaling has become cut off from the virtue part, where you say what are you actually trying to achieve? What are we? We're trying to ultimately, right? You're trying to help other people, right? If you're Christian, if you're Catholic, that's a big part of your the way you approach things, right? So I don't know. I'm not sure screaming at somebody or or damaging an artwork someplace is a really productive way of doing that.
Yeah. Speaking of damaging an artwork, total tangent. I was reading the news earlier today, and there was this thing about this guy, his artwork, it was modern art. He duct taped a banana to a wall, and then someone came in and ate that banana. That was the act. That was the work of art.
But see, what bothers me with that is that same exact thing happened a couple years ago. I saw that same story.
And maybe
Matt.
it was the same thing.
No,
maybe
no,
it was the same thing.
It's not, because this happened a couple years ago. A guy did that, and then another artist came in and ate it, and he said that he was contributing to the art. And so this is just plagiarizing the art. It's not even. It's AI chatbot art. It's not the
AI
real thing.
chatbot
I don't
banana
support
art.
it.
Yeah, no doubt.
Listen, Jason, you've been really generous to give us this time. I want to ask you one last question before we wrap up. It's something that you've alluded to a couple times in your answers already, but it's something that you hold as a management principle at Strategas, and that is humility. Now, humility in the context of the financial world and stocks and bonds and trading and everything like that would be one thing, but then there's the deeper human principle and virtue of humility. So talk to me a little bit about what humility means to you as management principle and as a life principle.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for asking that question, because it's very, and one of my favorite Bible verses is, right, the exalted shall be humbled and the humbled shall be exalted, right?
Mm.
And I think the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And there's obviously so much of the Gospels is about the virtue of humility. And I find, I think it's, especially if you're a capitalist, right? If capitalism is done right, there's failure. People are allowed to fail. And we could get go on that, but that's one of the problems with Wall Street right now. A little bit is that some of these companies are too big to fail, so which creates other issues. But from my perspective, humility in all things, right? Humility, not just, as you said, not just in terms of the way we forecast the markets, because you're going to be wrong. That is part and parcel of, even if you're great, you're going to be wrong plenty of times, and you have to learn from that. I think humility also in terms of the way you're dealing with other people, to understand building our business, that it's very much, everyone says this, but in our case, I really believe it's true. It's very much a team effort. Our partners sit out among everyone else. We have our own offices, but day to day we sit side by side with everyone else in the company, and that keeps us closer to the people who work with us, and it keeps us closer to the clients. And I think that's good from maybe a moral point of view, but also I think it's a very practically good thing for a company as well. And so, in my life, I haven't found it hard to be humble. I mean, so many of the things I love in life are humiliating, like, baseball or
Are you a
golf.
Mets fan? Are you a Mets fan too?
Yeah.
Because I know all about being humiliated.
It's worse right now. But yeah, no, whether it's baseball or golf or the financial markets, there's a lot of things that can break your heart, so,
Right.
But it's good. It's not the worst thing.
Yeah, I think, stereotypically, right? Like, stereotypically, the Wall Street guy is like the guy with the massive bravado, and leading up to this interview, something that I was thinking a lot about was how Christ calls us to be meek, but being meek and being weak are different things.
Absolutely.
Right on.
And so it is. You are capable of making strong decisions, good decisions, and still being meek. And I think meekness really is very similar to humility.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way, but I love that. I think that you're right.
Yep.
It's hard to do anything if you're weak.
Thanks. I thought the rhyme was real nice.
No, it's great. I love it. I'm going to steal that, I think.
Please do.
Okay.
I probably stole it from someone and didn't realize. So, right? Good artists create, great artists steal.
Right.
And I stole that from Father Sam.
Because some artists steal bananas and eat
he
them.
stole it.
And
Oh,
that's
you
it.
beat me to it.
Yeah. Well, Jason, thanks so much. This is great, and I really love I love this approach that you've got, not just on the Wall Street side of things, but also recognizing that the work that you're doing at Wall Street is going to have an impact on the whole of our society. The work that happens in in the financial world really does have a both a practical and a philosophical impact on what's going on in the broader society, in politics and everything else. And it's important for us to keep those things together. So I really appreciate that work that you're doing and giving us the time here today. We're going to link to your website and to all kinds of other stuff that you've been contributing in our show notes. If you want to learn more about Jason Trennert, check out the show notes for the tangent today. And Jason, again, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for being here.
It's my honor and privilege, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
God bless you.
Thank you.